Merry Christmas everyone, and welcome to a brand new video from me, Pickles Parker Reviews. Now let's talk about Doctor Who Christmas specials. They're often the subject of every Doctor YouTuber's Christmas special. However, we haven't actually had a Christmas special for quite a while now. Gone are the days when we had one every single year. We haven't had a Christmas special since the end of 2017, and I feel as if that has made people sort of glorify the Christmas specials a little bit. People are desperate for any episode to be shown on Christmas and for us to get Christmas specials back, and really hoping that Rusty Davis brings back the Christmas specials when he returns. However, I think it's a bit more complicated than just we miss the Christmas specials, we should bring them back. Because ultimately I think the Christmas specials were a very mixed bag. And ultimately, I feel as if we should only bring back the Christmas specials if we do them properly. Now, rather than ranking the Christmas specials today, I thought I'd take a more in-depth look at what makes a good Christmas special and what perhaps makes a bad Christmas special in the terms of Doctor Who. And for me, I think the Christmas specials really sort of became rather tiresome and just really annoying and like a waste of time in the latter years of the Capaldi era. I say the latter years, practically Husbands of Riversong onwards, the last 3 Capaldi specials. For me, it really felt as if, like, what is even the point of having Christmas specials at this point? Because they felt as if Stephen Moffat wasn't really interested in writing these stories. It felt as if he was obligated to write them, so he just came up with an idea. He just saw something one time and think, right, yep, that's the idea for my story, and not much thought really went into it, and that's why those 3 episodes aren't very good at all, because there's no thought or care into it, at least for Husbands of Riversong and Return of Dr. Mystere, and even Twice Upon a Time. It just feels as if you're sort of running around doing various eccentric things for no real reason. There's no real plot to these specials, and they all just sort of feel like plotless nonsense that would easily be the worst story in any series they were in, that wouldn't even be commissioned in any series that they were in, because the showrunner would say that's just a terrible episode. But for some reason, it's okay to do it for a Christmas special. It was really annoying getting excited for something that you knew was probably not going to be that good, because that just was what the Christmas specials had become. It was less of a treat and more of just an obligation that was getting really tiresome. However, that sort of made us forget what a good Christmas special was. I think the best Christmas specials are ones that you can tell that the showrunner was really passionate about telling this story, that they'd actually thought quite a lot about in terms of how can we not only make a great story, but how can we take the ideas and tropes associated with Christmas stories and really bring them in to make a really solid Doctor Who story. And ultimately, I think sometimes that's why there are generation stories on Christmas, minus Twice Upon a Time, which I think it's clear to see that Moffat wasn't amazingly invested in that story. I think if you look at The End of Time and Time of the Doctor especially, I know lots of people don't like that story, and obviously with me being the Matt Smith shill I am, obviously I love Time of the Doctor. But I think for me, Time of the Doctor is a great example of what a Christmas special should be in Doctor Who terms. While on the surface, Christmas isn't a major part of that story, it may not seem, ultimately it ties various elements that we associate with Christmas to make the story really work. Now, what I'm talking about is there's sort of 3 things that I'd associate with Christmas films and media in general that we all see. In various Christmas films, you sort of find sort of 3 factors. There may be some outliers, but these are sort of the 3 factors that I think about. There's a sense of wonder when it comes to Christmas, you know, the magic, the childhood, you know, wonder of Christmas. Then there's a sense of tragedy you know, a sense of deep sadness about something, things just not quite going right. But then there's always a sense of hope in the end, that regardless of what happens and regardless of what tragic things may happen and what sad things the protagonist experiences, there's always a sense of hope for the future. And I think that the best Christmas specials take those elements that we see in Christmas media and put them and frame a Doctor Who story around them. And I think the Time of the Doctor works so well is because not only does it really capture that magic sense of wonder that we associate with Christmas, that actually blends so well with the fairy tale-esque energy of the Matt Smith era, but also it really uses the idea of Christmas to really articulate that tragedy of the Doctor. You know, him having to stay on the planet, but then also articulating that sense of hope at the end as well. It really does quite brilliantly demonstrate those three stages, but also the whole Christmas and magic sort of stuff makes it seem like a fairy tale, and it does just underpin that ultimate tragedy of the Doctor. But also as a story, I think it very much shows the values of Christmas. You know, that whole thing that it's a time to be selfless, it's a time to give, not receive. And ultimately that is technically what the Doctor does. The Doctor gives, not receives. So ultimately the town being called Christmas is very apt, because that is essentially what the Doctor is doing in this scenario. And I think it's snowing and it being Christmas, this magical time when everyone's supposed to be together, ultimately the Doctor sacrificing himself and being alone ultimately hits that much harder. But the sacrifice and tragedy that the Doctor undergoes in that story makes the hope feel even more joyous. And I could sit here all day and speak about Time of the Doctor, and I probably will at some point. I was originally going to speak about Time of the Doctor for this whole video, and then I thought I probably will dedicate more time to it, and actually maybe do more of a video essay on that, because I love Time of the Doctor. It's a really underrated, brilliant story. But that is just one example of, I think, a Christmas special that really looks at the Christmas ideas, and therefore while Time of the Doctor may seem as if it's more of a story in its own right than a Christmas special, it actually utilises the brilliant core values of Christmas to really facilitate its story. And the best Christmas specials do this. I feel as if the best Christmas specials are all sort of underpinned by tragedy and then a sense of hope. Let's talk about The End of Time. I don't know, actually. I was going to say The End of Time in a similar vein to The Time of the Doctor, but thinking about it, there isn't much of a sense of hope in that story. The Doctor is pretty morbid about his death, even till the end, but it still sort of applies. The Snowmen, in a similar vein to The Time of the Doctor, really articulates that sense of wonder, tragedy and hope quite well. And I think The Snowmen is also a use of something that Moffat would look at and think, what is a Christmas trope that I can really incorporate into a Doctor Who story? Well, Victorian Christmas, that real great sense of magic that you think about Victorian Christmas, and there's something about the Snowman that really captures that rather brilliantly. And yeah, A Christmas Carol, another one, Stephen Moffat looking at, you know, a piece of Christmas literature and thinking, how can I actually incorporate Doctor Who in this to make this feel unique and actually a great Doctor Who story? Because it's not just a case of thinking, that's Christmassy, let's make a Doctor Who story around it. Like the superhero thing where Return of the Doctor and Mysterio. Fun fact, it isn't a good Doctor Who story because it's just a sort of generic Clark Kent and Lois Lane story with the Doctor in it. It's like Audi, Clark Kent and Lois Lane, and boom, the Doctor's just sort of a side character in it. It doesn't really work at all. But A Christmas Carol works because it's taking this story, A Christmas Carol, and actually putting a Doctor Who spin on it that makes it a great story, incorporates time travel and all this sort of stuff, that makes it a truly different tale to what you've seen before, but something that can hold up on its own as a great Doctor Who story, not just a great Doctor Who Christmas special. I feel as if the best Doctor Who Christmas specials are very good stories in their own right, and the worst Doctor Who Christmas specials are also the worst stories. And there are some examples of Christmas specials that I would say are good episodes, but not necessarily good Christmas specials. The Christmas Invasion, for me, doesn't really incorporate, despite being the first Christmas special, yeah, it has the Santa robot, it has the Killer Christmas Tree, but ultimately in terms of the story and the themes of Christmas, I'm really trying to incorporate that. It really just feels like an invasion story that really has nothing to do with Christmas at all. Runaway Bride has more to do with Christmas, as does Voyage of the Damned, which I think is a great example of a Christmas story. The Next Doctor does sort of feel, was again in a similar vein to the later Moffat specials, something that ultimately not much time was sort of taken developing this story, and more so feels like something that was written out of obligation. The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe the same. So I think we're getting a pattern of those that you can see had a lot of thought got into them to make them and tie in elements of Christmas to make a really fantastic product, and ones that just sort of felt as if they were written in a couple of days out of obligation that the showrunner really didn't feel much passion for, though ultimately would have never wanted to write in their own series. And I think that's the big thing. A showrunner should only write stories that they want to write, and if they almost feel as if they're being forced to write a story like any writer, it's not going to be that good. So if we're going to bring back Christmas specials, it needs to be something that the showrunner actually wants and not a mandate by the BBC. And in my opinion, it should certainly be something that isn't written by the showrunner every single year. Because I think the problem that we got by that is, yes, the showrunner is probably the best writer on your programme, knows the characters inside out, and can deliver a really interesting Christmas special. There's only so many Christmas ideas that a showrunner can come up with. And ultimately, when you're doing it at the end of the series all the time, when the showrunner's probably exhausted, ultimately they're not going to have those bright ideas. They're not going to be interested or passionate about this script, and I think that's always a must. You need to have them passionate about their work, and I think you can see that ultimately when there feels as if there's no passion in these stories, they feel really lifeless, they feel pointless, they feel like a really irritating watch. You're just like, why was this even made? Ultimately for me, what I would do is just have different writers write the Christmas specials, outsource it to someone already existing who's writing on your series, and say, hey, would you like to come and write this Christmas special? What ideas do you have? I think someone like Mark Gatiss would have great ideas for a Christmas special. Maybe drafting Rob Shearman for a one-off. Whatever you want. I think it would be really interesting to get different writers. Alternatively, you could maybe bring back different Doctors and Companions for this, as it's a Christmas special. Perhaps you could remake it special and it not being with the incumbent Doctor and Companions, but a different Doctor and Companion. Although I would also be hesitant to do this because I think it will sort of remove the magic from multi-Doctor stories and seeing them return. But then again, we've had a lot of multi-Doctor stories, so the magic is sort of over. But maybe not so do that. But it's all ideas to just make Christmas specials feel fresh and unique. Ultimately, I think the best Christmas specials all tie in Christmas in a satisfying way. It uses Christmas to craft a great Doctor Who story, and it's always something that the showrunner's passionate about. When the showrunner has a great idea and just wants to go and run with it, which is ultimately always the best of their own stories in their own series, and that's why it becomes their best Christmas specials. But ultimately, when it's not their best Christmas special, it's when they have no passion. If we are to bring them back with Rusty Davies, we need to make sure it's something he's passionate about, and whatever writer writes them, they need to be passionate about the story and feel as if it's a great story that they can really craft. Now, the New Year's specials for me have been a mixed bag, mainly because they've just sort of been random Doctor Who stories that have nothing to do with New Year's, because what can you really do with a New Year's special? If anything, a regeneration story would be perfect for a New Year's special. That sense of reflecting on what's gone on and what's gone before, whilst also looking ahead to the future, is practically everything associated with New Year's and everything associated with a regeneration story. However, we've never had a New Year's regeneration story, and we're never going to, probably, which is a bit odd. In terms of the New Year's specials, they're a mixed bag, I think, because they really have nothing to do with New Year's, so it all seems a bit pointless. And for me, the 1 hour runtime is a bit of a worry, because when you're not trying to do Christmas specials, which, yes, they're good stories, but can usually be fitted into an hour's runtime, when you're doing these big scale Dalek stories, an hour just isn't long enough. And I think, especially with Revolution of the Daleks, that was such a rush story, and I'm actually looking forward to Eve of the Daleks because it looks like more of a smaller contained story that can actually, you know, be good in that length of time. You know, Revolution of the Daleks needed to be a two-parter, or if we're going to continue with New Year's specials, make them an hour and a half. You know, like the old-fashioned Sherlock stories back in the day. I think that would be pretty neat. You can have darker Christmas specials like Last Christmas, lighter Christmas specials like The Runaway Bride, for example, but I think ultimately the must is that they need to incorporate elements of Christmas to better their story, because it's a Christmas special, but also be interested in those Christmas elements. Don't drag them in by obligation. Think of a great Doctor Who story in which you can use the themes of Christmas to underpin and really make it so that's a brilliant idea for the showrunner. That's an idea they love and are passionate about, and then and only then will you get a great Christmas special. If you're gonna bring them back, then that's a necessity the Doctor Who needs to do. Yes, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and drop a sub if you want to see more content from me. I will be reviewing Eve of the Daleks when that comes out on New Year's Day, and probably previewing it as well. So if you want to see that, then stay tuned. It feels weird because Flux wasn't all that long ago, and now we're getting Eve of the Daleks, and it's Christmas, and it's all come about quite fast. It's all been a bit mental. But yes, thank you guys for everything and the support throughout the year. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you will have a very good Christmas. What do you think of the Christmas specials? Do you want them to come back? Do you not? Do you agree with me? Do you not? Do you feel as if we've perhaps glorified them and sort of forgotten that some of them weren't that great? Whatever you think, draw your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you prefer the New Year's specials? Do you prefer Christmas specials? Whatever you think, draw your thoughts in the comment section below. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. So yes, thank you guys for watching. I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas, and of course, a goodbye.